I was standing at the edge of my dad's driveway in Pendleton, Oregon, on Christmas night, with snow soaking through the cuffs of my jeans and the cold biting straight through my coat. The porch light was on, casting a warm yellow circle over the front steps, and from where I stood, half hidden behind the bare branches of the old maple tree, I could see straight into the dining room. The window was fogged around the edges, but the center was clear enough to show me everything I was not part of. Dad sat at the head of the table, his shoulders relaxed, his face flushed in that way it always got when he felt pleased with himself. Mom sat to his right, leaning in close, laughing with her hand near her mouth like she always did when company was over. Naomi was there too, wearing the sweater I had bought her last winter, her hair pulled back, her chair tipped slightly as she talked with her hands. A couple of neighbors were seated around the table, people I recognized from growing up in this town, people who had watched me leave for the Air Force and come back, quieter, older. Blankets clinked. Silverware scraped softly against porcelain. Someone laughed, loud and easy. I could even see steam rising from the food when Mom lifted the lid off one of the serving dishes. There was no empty chair, no place setting waiting to be filled, no pause in the conversation where someone might glance toward the door and wonder if I was coming. It was as if the idea of me had been erased entirely, like I had never belonged in that room to begin with. The snow kept falling, slow and steady, thick flakes drifting down under the streetlight. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, my fingers numb inside my glove, and for a moment I wondered how long I had been standing there. Long enough to hear Dad raise his voice just slightly, that familiar sound he used when he was telling a story he had already told. Long enough to watch Naomi reach for the bread basket and pass it to someone else, without looking up. A few days earlier, I had still believed I would be sitting at that table. I had woken up that morning to a message from Dad, short and blunt. No greeting, no softening words. He said Christmas was going to be small this year, and that it would be better if I did not come. When I called him, he did not answer. When I texted back asking what he meant, he finally responded later that night, telling me I was no longer welcome, that I had made things complicated for too long, that it was time I understood I was not part of the family anymore. There was no misunderstanding, no badly worded sentence. He told me plainly that I was disowned. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed when I read it, the room quiet, except for the hum of the heater, my phone glowing in my hands. I read the words over and over, waiting for them to change, waiting for something else to appear underneath, some explanation, some hint that he did not really mean it. Nothing came, just silence, the kind that settles in your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Standing there in the snow now, watching my family eat without me, that silence felt even louder. If you are listening to this right now, I am curious what you are doing. Maybe you are sitting at your kitchen table with a cup of coffee, or folding laundry, or driving down a familiar road. When this happened to me, I was standing alone in the cold, staring through a window, trying to understand how a place that once felt like home could shut its door so completely. I stayed there longer than I should have, long enough for my legs to start aching and my nose to burn from the cold, long enough to feel something shift inside me from shock to something heavier. Shame, maybe, or disbelief. I kept thinking someone would look up, catch sight of me, and everything would change. Dad would stand, his chair scraping back, and come to the door with that annoyed look he got when he thought I was being dramatic. He would tell me to come inside already, stop making a scene. No one looked up. I thought about all the times I had shown up without being asked. The years I spent in the Air Force, from 2012 to 2018, stationed wherever they sent me, missing birthdays and holidays, but still sending money home when Dad's construction business started to slip. I remembered wiring funds from a base thousands of miles away when he called, late one night, his voice tight, saying things were rough, and he just needed a little help to get through them. Month. I thought about Naomi, too. The first time I bailed her out, she had called me crying. She'd gotten into a fight at a bar, and things had gone too far. The second time was worse. Tied up with gambling debts she swore were under control. Each time I paid because that was what I did. I fixed things. I smoothed them over. Dad thanked me then. He called me responsible, dependable, the one he could count on. I wondered when that turned into being a problem. Inside the house, Someone poured another drink. David lifted his glass, said something I could not hear, and the table went quiet for a moment before everyone raised their own glasses in response. Whatever he said made them smile. Naomi leaned back in her chair, relaxed, safe. She did not look like someone on the brink of disaster. She looked like someone who knew she would always be caught before she fell. That was when it hit me. Not all at once, but like a slow crack spreading through glass. I had not been forgotten. I had been removed. This was not an oversight or a misunderstanding. This was a choice. I felt my throat tighten, my eyes burn, but I did not cry. I had cried enough already in the days after Dad's message. Cried alone in my apartment. Cried in the shower where no one could hear me. Out here, watching them through the window, I felt strangely calm. Like something essential had finally been confirmed. I stepped back from the tree, my boots crunching softly in the snow, and turned toward my car. The engine sounded too loud when I started it, echoing down the quiet street. For a second, I hesitated, glancing back at the house one last time. The light in the dining room glowed warm and steady, sealing itself off from the dark. As I pulled away, I told myself I would not come back like this again. I would not stand outside and wait to be let in. If I was no longer welcome at their table, then I needed to figure out where I belonged. The drive back was long and quiet. The radio stayed off. Snow blurred the edges of the road, and the headlights cut a narrow path through the dark. My mind kept circling the same questions. Who was I if I was not the reliable one, the fixer, the daughter who made things easier for everyone else? What did I do with all that energy once it was no longer needed? By the time I reached my apartment, the sky was already lightening at the edges, that pale winter gray that comes before morning. I sat in the car for a while before going inside, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my breath fogging the windshield. I felt empty, but underneath that emptiness, something else was starting to take shape. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to resolve. If my family no longer needed me, then I had to decide what I needed for myself. That was a question I had never really allowed myself to ask before. I locked the car, climbed the stairs, and went inside without looking back. The days that followed Christmas blurred together in a quiet I was not prepared for. No calls, no texts, no messages pretending nothing had happened. Dad did not reach out. Mom did not send one of her carefully worded notes asking me to be understanding. Naomi did not check in, not even out of habit. It was as if once the decision had been made, they all agreed to move on without me. I went back to work, answered emails, showed up to class, and nodded at people when they spoke to me, but everything felt slightly out of sync, like I was watching my own life through a thin pane of glass. At night, the silence in my apartment pressed in on me. I would catch myself reaching for my phone, not to call anyone, but just to make sure it was still there, that I had not imagined the messages, the erasure. There was a familiar voice in my head, one I had carried for most of my adult life. You are strong. You can handle it. You always do. It was the same voice that had kept me going through long deployments, through missed holidays, through phone calls that only came when something needed fixing. That voice told me not to dwell, not to make it a bigger deal than it was, not to feel hurt, because feeling hurt would mean admitting how much I needed their approval. So I tried to swallow it. I told myself other people had it worse. I told myself families fight and say things they do not mean. I told myself I would get over it. But every time I thought about that dining room table, about the empty space where I should have been, my chest tightened all over again. One night, close to midnight, I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed with my laptop open, the room lit only by the glow of the screen. Outside, the street was quiet. The snow piled along the curbs, reflecting the light from the lampposts. I had been scrolling aimlessly for nearly an hour when I typed a phrase into the search bar, without fully realizing what I was doing. Foreclosure properties, Eastern Oregon. I stared at the results, my finger hovering over the trackpad. It felt impulsive and absurd at the same time. I was a law student, not a rancher. I had never owned property. I had spent most of my adult life in places that never felt permanent. Barracks, rented apartments, temporary assignments. The idea of buying land felt too big, too final, and yet something about it made my breathing slow. I was not looking for something beautiful. I was not looking for a dream home with a wraparound porch and fresh paint. I was looking for something solid, something that did not belong to anyone else, something that could not be taken away with a single message. I clicked through listings, my eyes skimming past staged kitchens and renovated bathrooms. I stopped on the ones marked as foreclosures. Old places. Unloved places. Property banks wanted off their books. The descriptions were blunt and unromantic. I need work. Sold as is. No guarantees. That honesty appealed to me. A few days later, after another stretch of silence from my family, I made a call I had not planned to make. The woman who answered introduced herself as Evelyn Brooks. Her voice was steady and unhurried, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had seen a lot and did not waste time on nonsense. I told her my name and said I was interested in looking at some properties. I expected questions about my budget, my timeline, my plans. Instead, she paused for a moment and asked what I was really looking for. I did not have a polished answer. I told her the truth. I said I wanted a place that was mine, a place no one could decide I no longer belonged. She did not laugh or try to talk me out of it. She just said she thought she might have something and asked when I could come out. We met a few days later in a small town east of Pendleton, where the buildings sat low against the open sky and the wind seemed to carry for miles. Evelyn was in her mid-60s with short gray hair and a firm handshake. She wore sensible boots and a heavy coat that looked like it had seen more than a few winters. We drove in her truck, leaving the pavement behind and heading out onto a narrow road that cut through open land. Fields stretched out on either side, patched with snow and dead grass. The farther we went, the quieter it got. No traffic, no houses close enough to see, just the sound of tires on gravel and the low hum of the engine. She told me about the property as we drove. Silver Pine Ranch, 52 acres. Foreclosed after the previous owners fell behind. The house was old, the barn older. The land itself was sound. Water rights intact, boundaries clearly marked. I listened, but I was not focused on the details yet. I was watching the landscape change, the way the trees grew thicker as we climbed slightly, the way the air seemed to open up. When we finally turned down a long gravel drive, I felt something shift inside me. The ranch was not impressive. The house sat low and weathered, its paint faded, the porch sagging slightly in the middle. The barn leaned to one side, its boards darkened with age. Pine trees lined the far edge of the property, their branches heavy with snow. There were no other houses in sight. Evelyn parked and shut off the engine. For a moment, neither of us moved. "It is quiet out here," she said, almost to herself. I stepped out of the truck, the cold air filling my lungs. It smelled like pine and earth and something clean I could not quite name. There was no sound of voices, no hum of traffic, no sense of being watched, just the wind moving through the trees and the crunch of snow under my boots. We walked through the house first. Inside, it smelled like dust and old wood. The floors creaked. The cabinets were worn, the wallpaper peeling at the corners. It needed work, a lot of it. But the structure felt solid. The windows looked out over open land instead of another building. I found myself standing in the middle of the living room, imagining a fire in the old stone fireplace. A chair pulled close, the quiet settling around me. We stepped back outside, and I walked a little way from the house, my boots sinking into the snow. I turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The land stretched out in every direction, uneven and wild, not manicured or controlled. No one was telling me where I could stand or how long I could stay. That was when the thought hit me, clear and steady. No one could tell me to leave. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the cold seep in, letting that realization settle into my bones. For the first time since Christmas, I felt something other than loss. I felt space. Evelyn watched me quietly. She did not rush me. When I finally turned back to her, my voice surprised even me with how certain it sounded. "I want it." She raised her eyebrows slightly, then nodded. "We can start the paperwork," she said. "You should take some time to think it over." I shook my head. "I have thought enough." We talked about numbers, timelines, and inspections. I asked questions, the practical part of my mind finally catching up. I knew what I could afford. I knew what risks I was taking. None of it scared me as much as the idea of going back to a life where my place was always conditional. That night, back in my apartment. I sat at the table with a legal pad and wrote out the steps. Savings, loan, closing costs. It was not reckless. It was deliberate. I did not tell Dad. I did not tell Mom. I did not tell Naomi. This was not something I needed their opinions on. For once, the decision was mine alone. When I went to bed, the silence felt different. Not empty, but expectant, like something had shifted direction. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my hands folded on my chest, and felt a flicker of fear. This choice scared me. It was big. It was irreversible. But beneath that fear was something stronger. Relief. If I was no longer welcome in the place I came from, then I would build a place of my own. The paperwork moved faster than I expected. By early January of 2024, I found myself sitting at a plain wooden desk in a small title office outside Pendleton, my coat draped over the back of the chair, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee that tasted faintly of cardboard. The heater rattled in the corner, pushing out dry air that made my eyes sting. It was not a dramatic moment. No music, no witnesses, no sense that my life was about to change forever. Just fluorescent lights, stacks of forms, and a woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose walking me through each page in a calm, practiced voice. She slid the final document toward me and pointed to the line where I needed to sign. My name was already printed there in clean black ink. Alexa Carter. Nothing else beneath it. No co-owner. No shared interest. No trust. Just me. I stared at it longer than necessary. I thought about all the places I had lived where my name had never really meant permanence. Base housing where everything belonged to the government. Apartments where the lease reminded you every month how temporary you were. Rooms I stayed in that felt borrowed. Like I was always one argument or one missed payment away from leaving. Even my dad's house had always felt conditional in ways I had not fully understood until now. This was different. This was not about proving anything to anyone. It was not a victory or a statement. It was a responsibility, a quiet, heavy thing that would be mine to carry whether things went well or not. I signed my name. The woman gathered the papers, clipped them together, and offered a polite smile. "Congratulations," she said. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and gravity settle into my chest. Pounding land meant there would be no one else to blame when something broke, no one else to call when decisions needed to be made. That thought did not scare me the way it once might have. It felt honest. The drive out to Silver Pine Ranch that afternoon felt different than before. The gravel road stretched ahead of me, winding through open land dusted with snow. When I pulled up near the house, I did not turn off the engine right away. I sat there listening to it idle, my breath fogging the windshield, letting the reality of it sink in. This was mine. I stepped out into the cold and stood there for a moment, hands shoved into my pockets, looking at the house like it might suddenly speak. The porch sagged slightly in the middle. The paint was faded, the trim chipped. It needed work, and a lot of it. But it felt solid. It felt honest, like it was not pretending to be something it was not. I did not rush into decorating or making it comfortable. The first things I did were practical. I replaced the locks, not because I felt threatened, but because I could, because it was my responsibility now. In the Air Force, you learn that security is not fear-based. It is routine. Preparation. I installed new deadbolts on every exterior door, tested them twice, then tested them again a few days later, just to be sure. Next came the cameras. Nothing fancy. One at the front of the house, one aimed down the long gravel drive, one near the barn. I mounted them carefully, adjusting the angles until they covered what mattered without intruding on the quiet. This was not about watching people. It was about awareness, about knowing what was happening on my own land. My days settled into a steady rhythm. I hauled old junk out of the barn, my gloves coated in dust and rust. I patched loose boards, cleared brush, and stacked firewood. My muscles ached in a way that felt earned. At night, I slept deeper than I had in years. No sirens, no neighbors through thin walls, just wind moving through pine trees and the soft creak of the house settling around me. Living out there introduced me to people in a way the city never had. One afternoon, a battered pickup pulled up while I was unloading lumber. The driver leaned out the window and introduced himself as Dale Peterson. He lived about a mile down the road. He asked if I needed anything, told me which part of the road iced over first in winter, and mentioned that folks around here looked out for each other. He did not pry. He did not ask why I was there alone. He simply welcomed me and drove on. A few days later, Sheriff Alan Mercer stopped by. He stepped out of his vehicle, tipped his hat, and said he liked to know who owned what in his county. He was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of calm posture that comes from years of being listened to. I told him my name. He asked what brought me out there. I said I wanted quiet. That seemed to satisfy him. He glanced at the cameras, nodded once, and said it was a smart setup. Land brings out strange behavior in people, he said. Better to be prepared. I filed that comment away without much thought at the time. For the most part, my life felt simpler than it had in years. I drove into town for supplies, nodded to familiar faces, and came back to my work. I studied in the evenings at the kitchen table, the lamp casting a warm circle of light over my books. I did not hear from Dad. I did not hear from Mom or Naomi. The absence still hurt, but it no longer felt raw. It was more like a dull ache, something I could live around. Then, one afternoon, something small unsettled that calm. I was at the hardware store loading bags of cement into my cart when I overheard two men talking near the counter. I was only half listening until one of them mentioned land east of town. Silver Pine, he said casually. My hand tightened on the cart handle. The other man shrugged and said someone had asked about it before it went into foreclosure. Asked about zoning, about future plans. I did not interrupt. I told myself it was normal. People ask about land all the time. Still, the words followed me home. A few days later, I found a piece of mail in my box that did not belong to me. The forwarding label was new, my address printed neatly over an older one. Inside was a notice from a legal office regarding prior interest in the property. My eyes skimmed the page until they caught on a familiar name, Naomi. It was nothing official. No claim, no ownership, just a name attached to a failed inquiry from months earlier. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and set it on the counter. The house felt quieter than usual that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of me, listening to the wind outside, trying to make sense of it. Naomi had never mentioned wanting land. She had never talked about building anything or starting over out here. It did not fit the sister I knew, the one who chased quick fixes and easy answers. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Carter was not an uncommon name. People asked about properties all the time. There was no reason to assume it had anything to do with me. I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer. Later, lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, I reminded myself that everything was in order. The purchase was clean. The paperwork was solid. My name was the only one on the deed. Whatever questions lingered, they could wait. For now, this place was mine. I believed that for a few weeks. I let the thought settle into my days the way the quiet had. I worked on the house, studied at the kitchen table in the evenings, and let the distance between me and my family stretch without trying to close it. I told myself that silence was its own kind of answer, and maybe it was better than another argument that would go nowhere. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was outside fixing a loose board on the porch. The sun was low and pale, the kind of winter light that makes everything look flatter than it is. I had my gloves on and a small pile of nails balanced on the step beside me when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it. I had started doing that more often lately, letting calls go to voicemail if I did not recognize the number. Or if I did, not have the energy to engage. But when I pulled the phone out and saw Dad's name on the screen, my stomach tightened in a way that felt automatic, like muscle memory. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered. He did not ask how I was. He did not say hello. His voice came through the line, sharp and already irritated, as if we had been in the middle of a conversation instead of weeks of silence. You bought land. It was not a question. It was an accusation. I stood up slowly, stepping off the porch and onto the gravel, the sound loud in the quiet air. Yes, I said, I did. There was a pause, the kind that felt loaded. I could hear his breathing on the other end, heavy and impatient. Why would you do that without talking to me first? he said. The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were new, but because of how familiar they were. Talk to me first, as if that had ever been an option that led to anything other than being told. No. Talk to you about what, Dad? I said. About a decision I made for myself. You know what I mean, he snapped. Big decisions like that affect everyone. Naomi needs stability right now. She needs a fresh start. There it was. Naomi. Always Naomi. I leaned against the porch railing, the wood rough under my palm. You have not spoken to me in weeks, I said. You told me I was not welcome anymore. You told me I was not part of the family. So what exactly was I supposed to discuss with you? He exhaled sharply. We are not going to get into that. That was a misunderstanding. My chest tightened. It was not a misunderstanding, Dad. You were very clear. He ignored that. Instead, he pressed on, his voice taking on that familiar tone he used when he thought he was being reasonable. You should have come to me. You know Naomi has had a hard year. This could have been something good for her, something she could build on. I felt a spark of anger flare, hot and sudden. I have helped Naomi, I said, over and over. I paid to get her out of trouble when she called me crying, whilst sitted money when she promised she had it under control. I did not complain. I did not lecture. I just helped. That is different, he said. This is an opportunity that belongs to me, I said quietly. The line went quiet again. I could picture him pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear, jaw set. He had always done that when he was trying to figure out how to regain control of a conversation. Finally, he spoke. You could sell it, he said, or at least put Naomi on the paperwork. Joint ownership. That way it stays in the family, and she has something to work with. I stared out across the land, the bare trees, the open sky. The idea landed between us, heavy and absurd. No, I said. He did not respond right away, like he had not expected that answer. No, I repeated, my voice steady. I am not selling it, and I am not putting Naomi on the deed. His voice rose. After everything I have done for you. I almost laughed, the sound bitter in my throat. Everything you have done, I said slowly, like telling me not to come home for Christmas, like deciding I was too complicated to keep around. That is not fair, he said. You always twist things. I felt something in me harden. I am not twisting anything. I am finally saying it out loud. You cut me out. You do not get to do that and then act surprised when I make my own decisions. There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was colder. You are being selfish. The word landed and sat there, heavy. I thought about all the years I had bent myself to keep the peace, all the times I had said yes when I wanted to say no, all the times I had been praised for being easy. If this is what selfish looks like, I said, then maybe I should have tried it sooner. He scoffed. You think you are better than us now. I closed my eyes for a moment. I do not think I am better, Dad. I think I am tired. I think I am done giving things away just to prove I belong. He tried another angle then, his voice shifting into something almost pleading. Naomi is struggling. You know that. She needs this. You have always been the strong one. You can handle things. She cannot. There it was, the unspoken rule of our family, finally said out loud. I was the one who could handle it, which meant I was the one who was expected to give. I took a breath. I am done handling things for everyone else, I said. This ranch is not a solution to Naomi's problems. It is not a fresh start if it comes at my expense. He grew quiet, then angry again. You are making a mistake. I shook my head, even though he could not see me. No, I am correcting one. The wind picked up, tugging at my jacket. I could hear the faint creak of the barn in the distance. If you do not reconsider, he said, there will be consequences. The threat was vague, but it was there. I felt my pulse quicken, not with fear, but with something like clarity. I am not reconsidering, I said, and you do not get to threaten me because you do not like my answer. There was nothing left to say. I ended the call before he could respond, my thumb pressing the screen with more force than necessary. For a moment, I just stood there, phone in my hand, the quiet rushing back in around me. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking slightly, but underneath it all was a strange sense of calm. I had said no. Out loud, without apologizing. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and went back to the porch. The loose board was still there, waiting to be fixed. The nails were still where I had left them. Life, it seemed, was moving forward, whether my family approved or not. I picked up the hammer and went back to work, knowing being deep down that the call had changed something in the air, and that this was far from over. For the next few days, I tried to live like a person who had not just been threatened by her own dad. I kept my routine. I split kindling behind the barn. I patched a loose section of fencing along the back field. I studied case briefs at my kitchen table with a mug of reheated coffee that never tasted as good as I wanted it to. From the outside, it probably looked like peace. Inside me, it felt like waiting. Not dramatic waiting. Not the kind where you sit by the window with a racing heart. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of waiting you get when you have spent years being the dependable one. The one who always steps in, the one who knows trouble does not announce itself with sirens. Trouble shows up as little changes in tone, a missed call, a strange silence. I started checking my cameras more often, telling myself it was just a habit. I told myself it was practical, like locking your doors at night. But the truth was, I could not shake the way Dad had said consequences. He had not said it like a warning. He had said it like a plan. That morning, the sky was a washed-out winter blue, and the sun made the snow look almost too bright to stare at. I was in the barn, sorting through a pile of old hardware I had found in a rusted coffee can, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. One buzz, then another, then a third. Motion alert at the gate. I wiped my gloves on my jeans and pulled my phone out, expecting to see a deer. Or maybe Dale Peterson stopping by with one of his casual neighbor check-ins. He had done that twice already. Always friendly. Never nosy. The kind of man who seemed to believe a newcomer should not be left to struggle alone. I tapped the notification. The live feed loaded, and my breath caught so hard it felt like a punch. Dad's truck was parked at the entrance, angled slightly like he intended to pull in the moment the gate opened. Mom stood near the passenger side with her arms wrapped tight around herself, as if the cold was the only thing bothering her. Naomi was there too, pacing in tight little circles, her hands moving, her shoulders hunched, her head snapping up toward the house as if she expected to see me watching. And they were not alone. A woman stood a few feet away, holding a clipboard and a folder tucked under her arm. Even through the grain of the camera, I recognized her posture. Straight back, practical coat, hair pulled back neatly. Evelyn Brooks. Beside the keypad, a man knelt on the gravel with a tool bag open. He wore a puffy jacket and work gloves, and he moved with the slow confidence of someone who had done the same job 1,000 times. He pulled out a small tool and leaned in toward the lock housing. A locksmith. My mouth went dry. For a second, my mind tried to find a softer explanation. Maybe Dad was just showing them the property line. Maybe Naomi had begged for a conversation and dragged Evelyn along as some kind of mediator. But the man's tool bag was open, and the way he angled his shoulder toward the gate was not the posture of someone there to talk. They were there to access my land. I stood perfectly still in the barn doorway, the cold air slipping in around my ankles. My heartbeat was loud enough that it felt like it might drown out the audio feed. Then I realized I could turn the sound on. I tapped the speaker icon. Dad's voice came through first, clear and confident in the open air. "She is not living here," he said. "She bought it and then ran off again. You know how she is, always on the move." My stomach clenched. That was not true. I have been here. I had been building a life here. But Dad spoke like he was stating a fact everyone should accept. Evelyn replied, her voice quieter, cautious. "I need to be clear about the owner's consent. I was told the owner is unavailable, but agreeable." David answered fast, too fast, like he was swatting a fly. She agreed. "She told me to handle it. She is my daughter. She trusts me." Mom added something in a low tone, soft but sharp around the edges. "She is being difficult again. This is for Naomi. She will calm down when she realizes it is the right thing. Naomi snapped, her voice tight and jittery. She is doing this to punish us. She is doing this because she is mad about Christmas. My throat tightened. Hearing it out loud made something in me feel both furious and hollow. They were rewriting reality in real time. They were turning my boundary into a tantrum. They were turning my home into a bargaining chip. Evelyn made a small sound that could have been sympathy or discomfort. She asked about paperwork again, and Dad responded by holding up a sheet of paper like a flag. "Here," he said, "temporary authorization, just to get us in. We have a showing. We are listing it today." The locksmith, the man kneeling at my gate, spoke next. "I need to confirm identity and authorization," he said. "I cannot bypass a lock without clear consent from the owner." Dad said something that made my skin crawl. I am the next best thing. She is my daughter. She is not here, and she told me she wants it handled. We are family. Family. The word came out of his mouth like a tool, something he used when it suited him. The same family he had told me I was no longer part of. The locksmith hesitated. He took the paper Dad handed him and looked it over. I could not see the details from this angle, but I could see the body language, the pause, the way he nodded slowly, like someone who wanted to believe what he was told. I felt the urge to sprint down my driveway and stop them with my own hands. My body wanted motion. My mind wanted confrontation. My heart wanted to scream. But another part of me, the part that had learned discipline the hard way, held the line. If I ran out there, Dad would make it about my emotions. He would speak over me. He would raise his voice. He would make me look unstable in front of Evelyn and the locksmith. He would do what he always did when he felt cornered, turn the situation into a performance where he was the reasonable one and I was the problem. I was not giving him that. I backed away from the barn doorway and walked quickly but quietly into the house. My boots left wet prints on the worn kitchen floor. I set my phone on the counter for a second, not because I was calm, but because I needed my hands to stop shaking long enough to think. The cameras were recording, video and audio. That mattered. My name was on the deed. That mattered. This was not a family disagreement. This was an attempted entry onto private property. I picked up my phone again and watched as the locksmith pulled out a different tool. The soft metallic clicks came through the feed, a small, precise sound, the kind that would have been harmless in any other context. Here, it felt like a violation. Dad was still talking. His voice rose and fell as he explained the property, pointing toward the house like a man giving a tour. He gestured toward the barn, the tree line, the open field. Evelyn made notes on her clipboard, but she looked uneasy now. She kept glancing back at the gate, then down the road, like she was waiting for someone to appear. Mom stood slightly behind Dad, her face pale. She kept rubbing her hands together. Naomi moved across to the gate, peering through the bars, squinting toward the house. Then Naomi said something that made my jaw tighten. She is not even here. She probably already gave up on this place. She does not stick with anything. She never sticks. I swallowed hard. The cruelty of it stung, but it also clarified something for me. This was how they saw me, not as the person who had paid her way through life, who had served, who had carried the family when they were falling apart. They saw me as convenient until I was inconvenient, strong until they needed to blame someone. The locksmith paused again and shook his head. He said something, and Dad stepped closer, impatient. "What do you mean it is not working?" Dad barked. "It is a gate. Just get it open." The locksmith replied, more firmly now. "This is a keypad system. I can replace the hardware, but I need proper authorization from the owner, and I need the owner's identification. A letter is not enough. Not for this." Evelyn's face shifted. I could see it even through the grain. Her brows drew together. She looked at Dad. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I told you I would come out to see the property if everything was clear. This does not feel clear." Dad snapped back. "It is clear." She agreed. "She is just being dramatic." "She is always dramatic." Mom whispered something to Dad, and he shook his head like he was swatting away her concern. Naomi stepped forward and grabbed the bars of the gate, rattling them. Her voice rose, sharp and trembling. "Alexa, stop acting like you own this. We know you are not here. You cannot keep doing this." My stomach dropped. She was yelling my name into the air like an accusation, like the land itself owed her an answer. I thought of the little girl she used to be, the one who clung to my arm at family gatherings because she was shy around strangers. That memory felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Dad leaned in close to the locksmith, voice low but forceful. I am telling you, we have permission. We need to list it today. Naomi needs this money. She needs this property. She has been through enough. Enough. Enough was always a word they used to excuse her. Enough pain, enough struggle, enough mistakes. As if her hardship erased her responsibility and made everyone else responsible instead. My hands were trembling again, and I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to inhale slowly, then exhale. This was the moment where I could either let them drag me into their chaos, or I could do what I had promised myself when I bought this ranch. Handle it with law, not emotion. I opened my contacts and found Sheriff Alan Mercer. My thumb hovered for half a second. I could already hear Dad's voice in my head, telling me I was overreacting, telling me I was punishing the family, telling me I was heartless. Then I heard the gate rattle again through the feed, Naomi pushing at it like force could change reality. I pressed the call. Sheriff Mercer answered quickly, his voice steady, professional. Sheriff Mercer. This is Alexa Carter, I said. I am at Silver Pine Ranch. There are people at my gate, my dad, my mom, my sister, a realtor, and a locksmith. They are trying to access the property without my permission. My cameras are recording. There was a brief pause. Not uncertainty, but focus. He asked where I was. He asked if I was safe. He asked if anyone had gotten past the gate. I am inside, I said. They are still outside the gate. The locksmith is working on it, but he seems hesitant. Sheriff Mercer told me to stay inside. He told me not to confront them alone. He told me he was on his way. When the call ended, I leaned my forehead against the kitchen cabinet for a moment. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like my ribs could not contain it. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go outside and demand that my own family stop treating me like I was optional. Instead, I lifted my phone again and watched. Evelyn stepped back from Dad now, her clipboard held tight against her chest. She looked down the road again. The locksmith began packing up his tools, slower than before, as if he was still deciding what was right. Dad's posture stiffened. He pointed toward the property again, talking faster, louder, trying to keep control of the narrative. Mom's hands were clasped so tightly I could see her knuckles whiten. Naomi stood at the gate, jaw clenched, eyes flashing toward the house like she expected me to appear and surrender. They had arrived confident. They had arrived believing this was theirs to manage. They believed I was gone, powerless, and easy to override. I watched them through the camera lens and felt something settle inside me, heavy but steady. They were wrong, and for the first time since Christmas, I did not feel like the erased daughter standing outside a window. I felt like the owner of my own life, making a choice in real time. I stayed inside, breathing through the shaking in my hands, waiting for the sound of tires on gravel that would mean the law had arrived. It did not take long. At first, I heard it faint, a low rumble carried by the cold air. Then the sound grew louder, steady, confident, coming up the road, like a promise being kept. Through the front window, I saw the county vehicle crest the slight rise near the pines, its lights flashing once as it slowed, then rolling to a stop behind Dad's truck. Sheriff Alan Mercer stepped out the way he always did, calm and deliberate, like the ground belonged to him, no matter whose land he stood on. He adjusted his hat, took one slow look at the group gathered by my gate, and started walking forward, with his hands relaxed at his sides. Not threatening, not dramatic, just a present. Dad straightened his shoulders immediately, like he was about to greet a guest. Mom shifted closer to him. Naomi stopped pacing. Evelyn held her clipboard tighter against her chest. The locksmith rose from his knees and stood very still, his tool bag open beside him like evidence. I did not move right away. Sheriff Mercer had told me to stay inside. A part of me wanted to obey, to let him handle the first contact. Another part of me felt like hiding would only feed Dad's story that I was unstable or unavailable. I stood in the entryway where I could see clearly, but was not yet in the open. My phone in my hand, the camera app still running, the little red recording icon steady in the corner. Sheriff Mercer called out first, his voice carrying easily. "Afternoon, folks." What is going on here? Dad answered fast, too fast, putting a friendly tone on his words like a coat he could slip on when he wanted to seem reasonable. "Sheriff, I am glad you are here. We are just dealing with a family matter. My daughter is confused, and we are trying to fix it." Sheriff Mercer did not smile. He stopped a few feet from the gate, eyes moving from Dad to the locksmith to Evelyn. He said, "I need to hear this from the property owner. Where is Miss Carter?" Dad lifted his chin toward the house. "She is not here." "She is off doing whatever she does. We are handling it." Naomi jumped in, her voice sharp and trembling. "She is doing this to punish us. She bought this place just to keep me from having a fresh start." Sheriff Mercer turned his head slightly, looking at Naomi as if he was measuring the weight of her words. Then he looked at Dad again. He asked, "Are you the deed holder?" Dad scoffed. "It is family property. It should stay in the family. We have paperwork." He gestured toward the paper he had handed the locksmith. The locksmith cleared his throat. "Sheriff, I was called here for a lock issue. They told me they had authority." He held up the paper, uncertain now, like a man realizing he might be standing on the wrong side of something serious. Sheriff Mercer held out his hand. "Let me see it." Dad hesitated for a heartbeat, then took the paper back from the locksmith and handed it over with a stiff smile. Sheriff Mercer scanned it, his face unreadable. He looked up. "This is not a deed. This is not a court order. This is not verified authorization from the legal owner." He handed it back, his voice still even. "You cannot use a locksmith to access someone else's property without permission." Dad's cheeks flushed. "It is my daughter. I have permission." Sheriff Mercer said, "That is not how it works." Evelyn shifted her weight and spoke up carefully. "Sheriff Mercer, I am Evelyn Brooks. I was asked to come see the property for a potential listing. I was told the owner had agreed, but could not be present. I am beginning to think that was not accurate." David snapped toward her, his control slipping. "It is accurate. You said you would list it." Evelyn's face tightened. "I said I would review the property and the legal documents. A listing requires consent from the owner. I do not see consent." For the first time, I saw real unease flicker across Mom's face. She glanced toward the house again, and I could almost hear the thought behind her eyes. What if Alexa is inside? What if she is watching? I took a breath and stepped forward. When I opened the front door, cold air rushed into the house, sharp and clean. The sound of the door was louder than it should have been, like a crack in a quiet room. Every head turned. I walked down the porch steps slowly, my boots crunching over the snow, and started toward the gate. I did not hurry. I did not wave my arms. I kept my shoulders back, my hands visible, my phone still in my right hand. With each step, my heart hammered, but my voice stayed steady in my head. Calm, clear, controlled. Dad's mouth fell open for a moment, then snapped shut. Naomi's eyes widened. Mom went very still. Sheriff Mercer nodded at me when I reached him, just a small acknowledgement that told me he was glad I had come out when I was ready. I stopped a few feet behind him and said, "Sheriff Mercer, I am Alexa Carter. I am the legal owner of this property. I did not authorize any locksmith, any realtor, or any family member to access this gate or list my land." Dad found his voice again, and it came out harsh. "Alexa, do not do this. Do not embarrass us." I looked at him and felt a wave of something I could not name at first. It was grief, maybe, mixed with disbelief. He had disowned me at Christmas. He had shut the door in my face, and now he was standing here, acting like he still had the right to tell me what not to do. "You are already embarrassing yourselves," I said quietly. I did not bring a locksmith to someone else's gate. Mom's lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. Naomi stepped forward, gripping the bars of the gate. Her voice shook. "You are really going to do this? You are really going to ruin my life?" I kept my eyes on her. I am not ruining your life, Naomi. I am refusing to give you mine. Dad stepped closer to the gate, his face tight. You bought something that was meant for your sister. You knew she needed it. I felt my jaw clench. No, Dad, I did not know. I found this ranch on the market like anyone else. I paid for it. I signed the deed. You do not get to rewrite that because it is inconvenient. Sheriff Mercer raised one hand slightly. Not aggressive, just a signal to slow things down. He looked at the locksmith. Sir, he said, pack up your tools. You are not authorized to work on this property. The locksmith nodded quickly, relief visible in the speed of his movements. Yes, Sheriff. He started gathering his tools, shoving them back into the bag with clumsy urgency. Evelyn cleared her throat. Miss Carter, I owe you an apology. I was misled about the ownership status. I should not have come out here without verifying directly with you. I nodded once. I appreciate you saying that. Dad spun toward Evelyn, anger spilling out. You cannot just walk away. We had an appointment. Evelyn held Dad's gaze, and her voice turned firm in a way that surprised me. Mr. Carter, you misrepresented ownership. I will not participate in that. She took a step back, then another, already disengaging. Watching Dad lose control of the narrative in front of strangers was like watching a mask slip. He had always been able to dominate a room in private, with volume and certainty. Out here, with a sheriff present and professionals backing away, his authority looked smaller. Naomi's voice rose again, desperate. Dad, tell them. Tell them you promised me. Tell them this was supposed to be mine. Dad's eyes flicked to Naomi, then back to me, and I saw something ugly there. Not love, not concerned. Calculation. He was weighing what he could say that would still keep him in charge. Sheriff Mercer spoke again, and his tone sharpened just slightly. Mr. Carter, miss. Carter has stated she did not authorize your presence, or any attempts to, access the gate. You have been informed you are on private property at this entrance. You need to leave. Dad's face reddened. This is ridiculous. This is a family issue, Sheriff Mercer said. It stopped being a family issue when you brought a locksmith and a realtor. Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling but pointed. Sheriff, we were trying to help Naomi. She is in trouble. We did not mean for this to become a big thing. Sheriff Mercer looked at her for a long moment. I understand you care about your family, but caring does not give you legal rights to someone else's property. This is trespass if you remain after being told to leave. Do you understand? The word trespass landed like a bell. Dad stared at Sheriff Mercer as if he had never heard a man say no to him. Then he turned his glare on me. You would call the sheriff on your own dad? I felt my stomach twist. I did not call the sheriff on my dad, I said. I called the sheriff on people who were trying to break into my property. Naomi laughed, sharp and bitter. Listen to her. She thinks she is so important now. She thinks she is some big law student who can push us around. I looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes were bright with anger, but underneath it was fear, raw and frantic. She was not acting like someone who simply wanted a home. She was acting like someone who felt trapped. That did not excuse what she was doing. David stepped forward again, voice rising. You are ungrateful. After everything we did for you. After we raised you. My hands tightened around my phone. Raised me, I repeated softly. You did not even invite me to Christmas. You disowned me. You told me I was not family anymore. But now you are standing at my gate like you still get to decide what belongs to you. Mom flinched at the word disowned. Her eyes darted away. Sheriff Mercer shifted his stance, and I could sense him preparing to end this. He said, Ms. Carter, do you want to issue a formal trespass notice? I swallowed. My instinct was to say yes immediately. Another part of me hesitated, because once you say yes, it becomes real. On paper, it becomes something you cannot pretend did not happen. It becomes a line you cannot quietly erase later. Then I looked at Dad, at the way he was still trying to control the situation with his posture and voice. And I knew pretending had never protected me. Yes, I said. I do. Dad's eyes widened. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Naomi's jaw dropped. Then she snapped it shut, anger taking over again. Sheriff Mercer nodded once. All right. Mr. Carter, ma'am, Ms. Carter, you are being given official notice. You are to leave this property entrance immediately, and you are not to return without the owner's permission. If you return and attempt to access the gate or enter the property, you may be arrested for trespassing. Do you understand? Dad opened his mouth, probably to argue, but no sound came out at first. Then he forced words through clenched teeth. This is unbelievable. Sheriff Mercer replied, "It is the law." Evelyn was already walking back toward her vehicle, her heels crunching on the gravel. She glanced back once, and I saw sympathy in her face, the kind you do not want, but cannot deny. The locksmith had his bag zipped now and was moving quickly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Dad watched them leave, and I could see him realizing something he was not used to. Strangers were not on his side. They were not impressed by his anger. They were not willing to be part of his story. He looked back at me with a hard stare. "You think this makes you strong?" I met his gaze. "No," I said. "I think it makes me safe." Naomi slammed her palm against the gate, a hollow metallic sound. "This is not over," she hissed. Sheriff Mercer turned his head toward her, and his voice cut through the air like a blade. "It can be over if you leave right now." Mom tugged at Dad's sleeve, whispering something urgently. Dad yanked his arm away, but the movement was less confident than before. He looked around, at the sheriff, at me, at the vehicles backing away, and for the first time, I saw something behind his rage. Embarrassment. No regret. No apology. Embarrassment that his control had been challenged in public. "Fine," he said, voice tight. "We are leaving. But do not pretend you are innocent in this. You are tearing this family apart." I did not answer him. I did not need to. The truth was standing there in the snow between us, recorded on my cameras, witnessed by a sheriff, and seen by two professionals who had already decided they wanted no part of it. Dad climbed into his truck. Mom followed, her shoulders hunched, her face pale. Naomi got in last, slamming the door hard enough that the sound echoed down the road. As the truck pulled away, the tires kicked up gravel. Then the sound faded, swallowed by the wide quiet of the ranch. Sheriff Mercer stayed a moment longer, watching the road as if he expected them to turn back. Then he looked at me. "You did the right thing," he said. I swallowed, my throat tight. It did not feel right. It felt like grief. Sheriff Mercer nodded, as if he understood that too. "Most right things do not feel good at first." He paused, then added, "I will file the report. If they come back, call me. Do not wait." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He tipped his hat again and headed back to his vehicle. When he drove away, the ranch fell quiet in that familiar way, but it was a different quiet now. Not peaceful. Not yet. More like the hush after a door has been slammed. I stood at the gate for a long time, staring at the empty road, my hands still cold, my heart still pounding. And for the first time, I understood that the chaos Dad had threatened was not just about land. It was about control, and he had just lost it. The days after that morning felt heavier than I expected. Not louder, not more dramatic, just dense, like the air before snow. The ranch was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that gives your thoughts too much room to wander. Sheriff Mercer filed the trespass report the same afternoon. He called once to confirm the details, and once more to tell me it was official. If Dad or anyone else came back without my permission, the warning would turn into something more serious. I thanked him, hung up, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood like it might. Tell me what came next. I slept poorly that night. I kept waking up to check the cameras, half expecting headlights to appear at the gate again. They never did. Morning came, pale and cold, sunlight spilling across the snow in a way that almost felt cruel, like the world had decided nothing important had happened. But something had. The first real crack in the story came 2 days later. It was Mom who called. I almost did not answer. Seeing her name on my screen made my chest tighten in that old, familiar way. The way it always did when I was about to be asked to fix something I did not break. But curiosity won out, and maybe a small, stubborn hope that someone might finally tell the truth. Her voice sounded smaller than usual, thinner. She did not start with accusations this time. Alexa, she said quietly, are you safe? I told her yes. She asked about the ranch, about the law, about whether the sheriff was still involved. Her questions were careful, measured, like she was testing the ground before stepping forward. Then she said something that made everything else click into place. Your sister is in trouble. More trouble than you know. I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. That sentence felt familiar. It had been used so many times before to explain away Naomi's choices, to soften consequences, to turn emergencies into excuses. How much trouble? I asked. Mom hesitated. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Then she said it. Naomi owes over $60,000. Gambling, credit cards, private loans, people who do not wait patiently. $60,000. The number landed hard, even spoken in words. It explained the panic I had seen on Naomi's face at the gate. It explained Dad's desperation, his willingness to bulldoze over boundaries he once pretended to respect. Mom kept talking, her words tumbling out now. She said Naomi had been hiding it for months. She said Dad had found out recently, and he had panicked. She said Naomi was being pressured, that people were calling, showing up, making threats. She said Dad believed the ranch could solve it, that selling it or using it as collateral would buy Naomi time. I listened, my fingers wrapped tightly around the edge of the table. So he thought stealing my property was the solution, I said flatly. Mom flinched. He did not see it that way. He thought you would understand. You always do. There it was, the unspoken rule of our family, finally said out loud. I was the one who understood. I was the one who adapted. I was the one who absorbed the damage so everyone else could pretend things were fine. I ended the call shortly after that, not because I was angry, but because I was exhausted. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, listening to the heater kick on and off, feeling the weight of years settle into something clear and solid. This was not just about Dad's control. It was about Naomi's choices. That realization made the next part harder, not easier. Naomi showed up 3 days later. I saw her car on the camera before I heard it on the gravel. She came alone this time. No dad, no mom, no entourage. Just her old sedan pulling up slowly, like she was afraid I might send her away before she even stepped out. I did not rush to meet her. I watched from the window as she sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, shoulders rising and falling with each breath. She looked smaller than she had at the gate, like someone who had run out of steam. When she finally got out, she did not head straight for the house. She stood there, staring at the land, at the fence, at the barn, taking it in, maybe realizing for the first time that this place was real, not an idea she could bend to her will. I stepped outside and waited on the porch. She looked up when she heard the door, and our eyes met across the yard. For a second, neither of us spoke. Hey, she said finally. Her voice was rough. Hey. She walked closer, stopping a few feet from the steps. She did not— David does not know I am here, she said. He would lose his mind if he did. That almost made me laugh. Instead, I nodded once. We stood there awkwardly, the cold biting through our coats, the wind tugging at Naomi's hair. Finally, she exhaled sharply. I messed up, Alexa. I waited. I had learned a long time ago not to fill silence for her. She rubbed her hands together, staring at the ground. I owe a lot of money, more than I ever admitted. I kept thinking I could win it back, or cover it with the next paycheck, or figure something out before anyone notices. Her voice cracked slightly. I did not want to screw up again. I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not anger, just recognition. This was the truth I had been circling for years. How much? I asked quietly. She swallowed. Over $60,000. Hearing it from her mouth made it feel heavier. I nodded slowly. Dad told me he would handle it, she went on. He said you would help. He said you always do. Her eyes flicked up to mine, then away. I let him believe that because it was easier than telling him the truth, that I had already burned through every bridge. I thought of the rehab bills, the bail money, The late-night calls where I had wired funds without asking questions. All the times I had helped, no conditions attached. I asked her, "Why did you not tell me?" She laughed weakly. "Because you would have said no. Or you would have asked for rules. Or accountability. And I did not want that. I wanted it fixed." There it was. Not malice. Not pure victimhood. Choice. "You tried to take my home," I said, keeping my voice even. "You stood at my gate and told people I did not own it." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not wipe them away. "I know. I was desperate. I told myself it was temporary, that you would forgive me after." She looked up then, really looked at me. "I did not think you would call the sheriff." "Neither did I said honestly. We stood in silence again, the wind filling the space between us. Finally, she spoke, softer now. "I have always been jealous of you." The admission hung there, fragile and raw. "You left. You did things. You were strong." She shook her head. "Dad always acted like you were the problem. But I knew the truth. You were the one who could handle anything. And I hated that, because it made me feel weak." Her honesty surprised me more than her anger ever had. I sat down on the porch step and gestured for her to sit too. She hesitated, then joined me, leaving a careful space between us. "I spent years being strong so you would not have to be," I said, "and that is part of the problem." She nodded, tears finally spilling over. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, looking out at the land. "I am not cutting you off, Naomi," I said, "but I am done rescuing you without conditions." She sniffed. "What does that mean?" "It means I will help you find real solutions. Counseling, financial planning, even legal advice if you need it. But I will not give you this ranch. I will not put my name, my future, up as collateral for your debt." Her shoulders sagged. "I knew you would say that." I turned to look at her, and you knew I would be right. She did not argue. "I want to change," she said quietly. "I just do not know how without Dad stepping in and messing everything up." I almost smiled at that. Almost. "Then we start with honesty," I said. "With him and with yourself, and with understanding that help does not mean control." She nodded slowly, wiping her face with the sleeve of her coat. "I am sorry, Alexa. For the gate, for the lies, for all of it." I believed her, not because she deserved instant forgiveness, but because this was the first time she was not asking me to erase consequences. We talked for another hour, about her debt, about the people she owed, about the choices she had refused to face. I listened. I asked questions. I did not promise miracles. When she finally stood to leave, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the snow. "I know this does not fix everything," she said. "No," I agreed. "It does not." But it was the first honest conversation we had ever had. As she drove away, I watched until her car disappeared down the road. I did not feel relieved. I did not feel victory. I felt grounded. There was no reconciliation, no hugs, no promises of happy endings. Just truth, spoken at last, and a boundary drawn clearly enough that even Naomi could see it. And for the first time, that felt like real progress. The day Dad came back to the ranch was the kind of day that should have felt like a victory. The weather was clear, not a cloud in the sky. The kind of crisp winter air that makes you feel alive, like the world has fresh potential. But nothing about it felt fresh. Nothing about it felt right. I saw his truck coming up the driveway from the window. It was slow, hesitant. My first instinct was to ignore it, to keep my distance. But I knew better. If he was here, it was because he had something to say, even if he hadn't quite figured out what that something was yet. I stood by the window for a while, watching his truck inch closer, my hands pressed flat against the cold glass. I could hear the crunch of tires on gravel, the distant hum of his engine, but I didn't move. Not yet. Finally, I went outside to meet him. David parked at the foot of the porch and sat there for a moment, not getting out of the truck. I waited, standing just outside the door, feeling the chill of the air against my skin. He stayed in the truck longer than I expected, longer than I thought he would have the patience for. When he finally stepped out, it was almost like he was still holding himself together, like he was bracing for something I wasn't sure he could face. His coat was buttoned up, collar turned up against the cold, but I saw the stiffness in his movements. There was something different in his walk, like the ground was less solid under his feet than it used to be. "Alexa," he said, his voice tight, like he was holding back words he hadn't wanted to say. He didn't walk up the steps or make a move toward me. He just stood there in the yard, waiting for me to say something first. I didn't. Finally, after a long moment of silence, he spoke again. "I've been thinking." I raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. I was done doing all the talking. He could say it, or he could leave. "I came here because..." He looked down, like he was searching for the right words. "I came here because I'm scared." I couldn't help it. The words hit me like a slap, and I crossed my arms tightly over my chest. Scared of what? Losing control? Losing Naomi? Losing everything? "I've spent my whole life trying to keep things from falling apart," he continued, his voice low and hesitant now. "And now it's slipping. Naomi, she's not handling it. She's going to fall apart, and I don't know how to stop it." I stood there, still, my mind racing. All this time, all the years of doing everything for them, of holding everything together, when they couldn't or wouldn't. And now this. Now I was supposed to fix it. "You wanted to fix Naomi," I said, my voice sharp without meaning to be. "And you thought using my ranch to do it was the answer." He winced, and I saw the guilt in his eyes, but he didn't back away. Instead, he nodded, slowly. I thought if I could just find a way to make things right for her, it would all work out. I didn't think you'd be so..." He hesitated again, looking for a word that wouldn't sting, but there wasn't one. "So unforgiving." Unforgiving. The word burned like a brand on my skin. I had always been the one who forgave. I had always been the one who kept the door open, no matter how often they slammed it in my face. "You want me to forgive you," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "For what?" The shift in his posture unmistakable. "I never meant to disown you," he said, his voice thick with something I couldn't read. "I thought if I cut you off, it would force you to understand that I was doing this for Naomi. I thought..." That's what he had said. Fear. And it hit me all at once. He had never been able to handle losing control. Not with me, not with Naomi, not with anything. Every move he made had always been about keeping that control. And when "I didn't want you to think I was weak," he said, his voice low now. "I didn't want you to see me struggling." And in that moment, I understood him more than I ever had before. I could see the way he had always hidden behind anger, behind the facade of strength, always pushing everyone away because he couldn't bear to show any vulnerability. I had learned that lesson the hard way. But somehow, in that instant, I felt a part of me soften. "I was strong for both of us," I said quietly. "For you, for Naomi. I never got to be weak, Dad. I never got to say that I couldn't do it anymore, because you would have used it against me. You would have said I wasn't strong enough." His face faltered, and I saw the smallest crack in his armor. "I didn't mean to do that to you," he said, the words ragged. "I just thought if I could keep it together for everyone else, you wouldn't have to worry. I didn't want you to have to carry it." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. For years, I had carried the weight of our family on my shoulders, thinking it was my responsibility. But now, standing here, facing him, I realized that I wasn't the one who needed to keep it all together anymore. He was. I took a breath, steadying myself. "I don't want to carry it anymore, Dad. I can't. I've spent my life trying to fix everything, trying to make sure Naomi and you didn't fall apart. But I can't do it anymore. You have to learn how to fix your own problems." His eyes tightened. "What do you want from me, Alexa?" I looked at him for a long time, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel betrayed. I just felt tired. "I want you to stop thinking that I am your answer," I said, my voice soft. "I want you to start figuring things out without me. I want you to let go of the control and trust that I'll be okay." Dad stood there, silent for a long time, like he was trying to process everything I had said. Finally, he looked up at me, And for the first time in a long time, I saw something I had not seen in years. Regret. I can't fix everything for you, I said gently, but I can stop fixing it for you. You have to start standing on your own feet. He nodded slowly, his lips pressed together tightly. I'll try, he said, the words slow and heavy. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a promise, but it was the first step in the right direction. I'm not going to just hand you the ranch, I said, my voice steady, but I'll help you with Naomi. I'll help her fix things, but on one condition. She's going to have to learn to stand on her own, too. Dad exhaled sharply, but this time, there was no anger behind it, only weariness. I understand. The words felt fragile between us, like something that could still shatter if we weren't careful. But for the first time in a long time, we were both standing on the same ground, not fighting each other, not trying to control anything. We stood there for a long time, the silence thick between us. Neither of us had the right words to make everything okay again. But maybe we didn't need them. Maybe, for once, just standing together, without expectations, was enough. David nodded once, a single sharp movement, before turning toward his truck. I'll see you later, he said, his voice quiet. I didn't answer him right away. I just stood there and watched him leave, feeling the weight of years lift slowly, piece by piece. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even healing, but it was the first step towards something new. And for once, it felt like enough. The weeks after that conversation did not bring miracles. There were no sudden apologies, no dramatic turnarounds where everyone became who I had always wished they would be. What came instead was quieter, slower, and far more unfamiliar stability. At first, it felt almost unsettling. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for another phone call filled with urgency, another crisis that would demand I step in and save the day. That reflex had been trained into me over decades. When nothing happened, my body did not quite know how to relax. The ranch settled into its own rhythm. Morning started with the soft hum of the heater and the smell of coffee filling the kitchen. I would step out onto the porch wrapped in an old jacket, watching the light creep over the field, earning the snow pale gold and then white again. The land looked the same, but I did not. I checked the cameras less often, not because I trusted the world completely, but because I trusted myself. I knew where the boundaries were now. I knew what I would do if someone tried to cross them again. Naomi called one evening. Not late, not frantic, just a regular call. She told me she had started working part-time at a small supply store outside town. Nothing glamorous. Stocking shelves, running the register, showing up on time. She said it like it mattered, and I could hear the cautious pride in her voice. She also told me she had met with a debt counselor. She did not sugarcoat it. She said it was uncomfortable. She said she hated seeing the numbers written out and hated admitting how bad things had gotten. But she was doing it. One payment plan at a time. One appointment at a time. I listened without interrupting, without offering advice unless she asked. When she finished, she waited, like she was bracing for judgment. I said I was proud of her. There was a long pause on the line. Then she exhaled, shaky and relieved. That meant more to her than anything I could have given her financially. I know that now. Dad changed too, though not in a way that would impress anyone looking for a dramatic redemption arc. He started calling before coming by. The first time he did it, I stared at my phone for a long moment before answering. He sounded awkward, almost formal, like he was speaking to someone he did not quite know how to approach anymore. I was thinking of stopping by this afternoon, he said, if that is okay. It was such a small thing, such a basic courtesy, and yet it carried more weight than any apology he had ever offered. I told him it was fine. When he came, he stayed on the porch. He did not wander the property. He did not make suggestions. He did not comment on what I should or should not be doing. We talked about the weather, about Naomi's job, about nothing in particular. When he left, he thanked me for my time. I stood there afterwards, stunned by how different it felt to be treated like an adult instead of a resource. Law school kept me busy. I spent long days buried in casebooks, my notes filled with scribbles about property rights, contracts, and civil procedure. Before all of this, those concepts had felt abstract, academic. Now, They felt personal. I started to understand something I had never fully grasped before. Justice is not about punishment. It is about protection. It is about creating structures that keep people from being harmed, including by the people who claim to love them. It is about boundaries that hold, even when emotions run high. I thought back to the morning at the gate, to the way my chest had tightened when I saw my family standing there with a locksmith and a realtor. I remembered how powerless I had felt for those few seconds before I reminded myself of the law, of my rights, of my choices. That moment had changed everything. Not because I had won, but because I had stood my ground. One afternoon, as winter began to loosen its grip, I found myself sitting on the porch steps with a notebook in my lap, not studying, not planning, just watching the land breathe. The snow was melting in patches, revealing dark soil beneath. A crow landed on the fence post and tilted its head at me, curious and unafraid. I realized then how rare this feeling was. Safety. Not the kind that comes from walls or locks alone, but the kind that settles into your bones when you know you will not abandon yourself anymore. Naomi stopped by that weekend. She brought coffee and a nervous smile. She talked about work, about the counselor, about how hard it was to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for favors. When she left, she hugged me, quick and careful, like she was afraid of asking for too much. I hugged her back, just as careful. Dad came by a few days later. He stayed shorter this time. He talked less. Before he left, he paused and looked out at the field. "You built something good here," he said quietly. I nodded. That was all. No grand speech, no emotional confession, just acknowledgement. As the sun dipped low, I walked the perimeter of the ranch, my boots sinking slightly into the softening ground. The air smelled different now, damp and alive. I thought about the woman I had been on Christmas Eve, standing outside a window, watching a family that had decided she no longer belonged. I wished I could tell her something. Not that everything would be okay, but that she would be okay, that she would learn what peace actually looks like. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady and earned. I stopped at the gate and rested my hand against the cool metal. It was closed, secure, exactly where it should be. Beyond it, the road stretched quiet and empty. Behind me, my home waited. For the first time in my life, I turned away from the gate without looking back and walked inside feeling completely, undeniably safe. Spring arrived slowly, the way it does out here. Not all at once, not with any grand announcement, just small signs that added up if you paid attention. Snow melting into soft mud along the fence line. The creek behind the barn runs louder each morning. The air carries that clean, hopeful smell that only comes when winter finally loosens its grip. With the change in season came an idea I did not plan. It arrived quietly, the way most honest things do. I decided to set a table. Not a holiday, not an apology dinner, just a simple meal at the ranch, on my terms, with people who could show up without trying to control the room. It scared me more than calling the sheriff ever had. Inviting people meant opening a door. It meant trusting that the boundaries I had built would hold. I spent the morning cleaning the kitchen, even though it was already clean. I wiped counters that did not need wiping. I rearranged chairs that would be moved again anyway. There was comfort in the small motions, in doing something with my hands while my mind wandered back and forth between past and present. A year ago, on Christmas Eve, I stood in the snow outside Dad's house, watching a table I was not welcome at. I could still see it clearly, the warm yellow light through the window, plates set neatly, laughter floating through the glass like something I was not meant to touch. That memory no longer made my chest tighten. It felt distant now, like a story someone else had told me. I cooked slowly. A simple roast, potatoes, vegetables I had picked up at the market in town. Nothing fancy, nothing meant to impress. I wanted the food to taste like effort, not performance. Naomi arrived first. She parked a little farther from the house than she needed to, like she was giving me space. She carried a small paper bag in one hand and looked nervous in that familiar way that used to make me want to fix things for her. She held up the bag when she saw me. "Bread from the bakery," she said. "I paid for it." I smiled and told her thank you. She looked relieved. Dad came later. True to his word, he called first, asked if the timing was still good, asked if there was anything he could bring. His voice sounded careful, almost gentle, like he was learning a new language and did not want to get it wrong. When he arrived, he did not step inside right away. He waited until I waved him in, like a guest instead of an owner. That detail did not go unnoticed. We sat around the table, the three of us, plates steaming, sunlight pouring in through the window over the sink. For a moment, the silence felt awkward. Then Naomi said something about work, and Dad nodded and asked a question. And just like that, conversation began. Not deep, not heavy, just At one point, Naomi laughed at something Dad said, and the sound startled all of us. It had been so long since laughter did not come with tension attached. I watched them from across the table and felt something settle into place. Inside me. This was not the family I had spent years trying to earn. This was something smaller, something more honest. After we ate, we lingered. Naomi helped clear dishes without being asked. Dad washed his plate and set it in the rack, moving carefully like he was aware of every gesture. When they left, they did not stay too long. They thanked me. They did not make plans for the next visit. They let the moment stand on its own. I stood alone in the kitchen afterward, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the late afternoon sun warming the floor. I realized then that this was what peace looked like. Not perfection, not forgiveness wrapped up in a bow, just space to breathe. Later that evening, I carried a chair outside and set it near the edge of the field. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the kind of sunset that makes you stop without meaning to. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed strength meant endurance, the one who believed love meant sacrifice without limit. I know better now. Boundaries do not destroy families. Silence does. Control does. Fear does. Boundaries save the parts of us that would otherwise disappear. I built this table myself, not just the one in my kitchen, but the one in my life, the one where respect is required, where help comes with honesty, where love does not mean surrendering your dignity. If you are listening to this and you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.